Go ahead, Matt.
All right, we're ready to start. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to a Geospatial Professional Network webinar that we're really excited to have. There are quite a few members of GPN that do work in education and higher education. And what we want to do today is, through our panel, have a conversation. Talk about some of the geospatial trends that they see and some observations that they see both in industry and in the classroom as that pertains to what we all do with GIS and going forward. Because nothing ever really stays the same for very long in geospatial technology. So my name is Matt Gerike. I'm a member of the GPN board, work in Virginia, and we'll be moderating our conversation today. And before we get into our questions and turn it over to our panelists, we do want to touch on a few upcoming events because at GPN there's always something going on in person or virtual or on demand. And so if you're wondering what Denver looks like in October, GIS Pro will be in the Rockies this October, and registration is open for that. There's a great calendar of presentations and workshops and technical courses for that. We'll also have the GIS Leadership Academy in person in Savannah, Georgia in December. Might be more attractive if you're in more of the northern climates. And then the Advanced GIS Leadership Academy will have its second iteration this November in New Orleans at the end of hurricane season, which is always good if we're talking about New Orleans. We do have a couple of webinars coming up, Groundwater Beneath Our Feet and Data to Science. Those are both in July and August. More information on all of those events is available on the GPN website, thegpn.org. The other thing to note is that GPN has recently launched its on-demand learning annex, which has a lot of past webinars, past events, past presentations. There are a few workshops that are available as well. And so if you're looking at things and you always can't quite make the in-person events or the webinars, visit thegpn.org, check out the learning annex and see if there's other in-demand things that you might be able to sign up for and take. So for our conversation today on geospatial trends and observations, we know that interest in geospatial and all the different forms of geospatial continues to grow in terms of number of courses and number of enrollments. And we see that across the United States and with folks that we talk to in Canada and other places. And so especially as we're kind of entering the summer, we're coming off of the spring, where some of us are looking ahead to the fall and looking to plan on that. We thought it would be a good opportunity to stop and pause and reflect for the higher ed community on what's going on, what's changing, what are we doing different, what are we seeing different in students, because we know that when these students graduate, they're going to be the folks that our colleagues out in the professional world will be hiring to fill positions. And that understanding, that conversation of content and generational changes or expectations is always a really healthy one to have, I think, so we don't have to learn it firsthand ourselves when unexpected things happen. So for our housekeeping, all attendees are muted. We do have the Q&A function turned on, so if you have a question that you'd like to directly ask our panel, please put it in there and I will work that in. If you want to reflect or chat or give feedback or have the side conversation, please use the webinar chat for that. And then a recording of today's session will be available in the GPN Learning Annex. So with us today, we have a wide variety of folks from different places, from the East Coast to the Midwest, from PhD programs to smaller institutions. from folks that are advising grad students to folks that are helping make these GIS and geospatial programs work both in the classroom and colleges and universities. And so I won't read through the panelist list here, but these are the folks that will be talking. But I'd like to get started and have everybody go around and introduce themselves by way of introduction. Who are you? Where do you teach or where do you work? And what content are you adding or updating in your existing geospatial classes? Debs, would you like to get us started?
Okay, I'll be the first one to go. Thank you everyone for attending this very important and timely webinar. And thank you GPN for inviting me to speak on this important topic. So as Matt mentioned, my name is Debs Ghosh. I'm a professor in the Department of Geography, Sustainability, Community and Urban Studies. We just rebranded and renamed our department recently, so I'm still getting used to in that long acronym. I teach and research in the areas of GIS and health. I predominantly teach graduate courses, and one course that I have recently developed in the last 2-3 years is GIS for Health and Environment, which is an asynchronous class and geared towards GIS professionals. So it had to be in a format that is very accessible. Other than that, I teach spatial statistics, spatial analysis, which often involves a whole lot of geospatial, broadly defined applications and technology, which I'll be recently taking up from another faculty member. So I'll be in the process of updating it. What was the other thing you mentioned? Oh yeah, it's in front of the screen. So content. So I like to see the content of any course, and especially GIS or geospatial related course, in two broad sections, given my applied area and my initial formative years where I learned about GIS science, the systems and the all society, the three distinct divisions of that, is one core material and one applied material. So in the core material, I try to keep the fundamentals as is. However, address the fundamentals if there is a way of automating it or understanding it, expanding the breadth of understanding the core. But I still like to keep the core and the fundamentals as is. And I'll speak more on that, why I do so, because I believe that's very important. The part that I keep changing is the applied part, which is health and environment in my field, is how geospatial technologies can be applied in health and environment. And that is a very dynamic and evolving applied field, and that has to be changed and updated to be current with the applications, and also show the expanse and breadth of GIS applications in that area. I'll stop there. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Robbyn, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Robbyn Abbitt. I am the GIS coordinator at Miami University, not in Florida, though it feels like Florida right now. We're in the middle of the Midwest. I'm in Southwest Ohio, about 45 minutes north of Cincinnati. So that's where I am, and that's where I coordinate the GIS programs and courses here at Miami. And I also teach most of the classes, at least, a handful of times. My primary classes that I teach are our advanced GIS class and our Python programming class are the two that I personally teach the most. When it comes to updating, I chuckle a little bit because I feel like we're constantly updating everything. Except for what Deb said, we do have a strong belief in the consistency of the fundamentals, but we're always updating things to try and keep on pace for what we see happening in the world around us. A couple of specifics would be, we are working now to integrate drones into more of our classes and give more of our students hands-on flight experience, and we're actually creating some new classes for that. And then the other things are we're trying to look a little bit at geo AI, machine learning, kind of the concept of digital twins. I'm sure that'll be talked about at some point in time through here. It's just one of those things that we are sometimes hamstrung by the number of students who need to be doing these things at the same time, and some of our bandwidth and our resources. But those are some of the things that we're thinking about. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, thanks, Robbyn. Carmi?
Sure, I'm Carmi Neiger. I'm currently teaching at DePaul University in Chicago after a career of, I guess, 15 years at Elmhurst University. I'm a little different than I think most of the people here in that I'm a late in life academic. For lack of a better term, I worked in industry for 27 years before going back to school and getting my PhD and starting my teaching career. 10 of those years were actually at Esri. And I would say, just to be brief, the three things that I'm updating and beginning to spend more time on in my classes, and I teach Intro GIS, I teach Introduction to Spatial Analysis, Advanced Spatial Analysis. I'm also teaching a crime mapping and analysis course that's co-listed with a criminology department and has become one of their required courses. I'm integrating more web-based GIS, both in terms of on the practitioner side as well as a way to as a way to distribute information, map-based information, and other spatial data in general. That's thing one. Thing two is data scrub techniques. That is, unlike when students usually get nice, clean exercises with clean data sets, that's great, but they're not going to get that all the time anyway in the real world. And I think it's valuable to teach them how to clean up data so that you can actually do analysis on your data sets. And the third thing, and perhaps it's surprising, is the soft skills, communication skills, and how to function effectively in an organization. I don't want students who are going to hide behind a monitor when they get out into the real world. I want people who are going to go out and become not merely GIS evangelists, but GIS entrepreneurs. And there's background that they need in terms of organizational knowledge in order to be able to be effective doing that. Good.
Excellent. Thanks, Carmi. Kevin?
Hi, everyone. I am the Geospatial Information Officer at the University of South Carolina. I work across both academic, education and research, as well as administrative units. So I actually fall within administration and finance. And I also teach. I teach Geography 105, Digital Earth, and then I'm developing a new course for this fall called WebGIS Studio. The stuff that I'm adding or updating, I'd say focuses on three themes. Practical applications. A lot of our students, especially here at a large research institution, and they do research, and that's what they're taught to do by most of their faculty. But I'd like to get them exposure to the way that we're using GIS outside of academia. One way I'm doing that is bringing ethics in. So I have ethics sessions. We do, geoethical inquiries and case studies. And so that brings in both a practical use, but it also brings in that kind of critical thinking ethics piece that I think is incredibly important. Going to full WebGIS for our Digital Earth course. It kind of developed over a long period of time with we have 16 sections of it with 40 students each year. So we're well over 600 students a year, and we have a lot of instructors, and the kind of content diverged. So we kind of reeled it back in and we're like, all right, we're going to teach ArcGIS online and that's it. We're going to kind of keep it simple for the students. So the other things I've added in, I brought in the Career Center into my classrooms to give like a career, what should you be doing outside of going to classes to prepare yourself, how to use the library. That's a gap that just most students don't ever get. Yeah, so that's where I am.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. And last, certainly not least, we have a twofer from University of West Florida, and we did this intentionally with Derek and Amber, both from the same program. Amber, could you get us started, and then we'll turn it over to Derek?
Absolutely. Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Amber Bloechle of the University of West Florida. It's in the panhandle of Florida. If you're not familiar, it's the last city, the most west city in Florida. Not there today. I'm actually in North Carolina on vacation for the 4th holiday. Anyways, so I'm the program director we have fully online programs in GIS that I oversee, that Derek and I are both involved with. We have an undergraduate and graduate GIS certificate program. This is a 7-course program, also including a GIS internship. A lot of our students come to UWF, just to get this certificate. It is it's comprehensive, 7 classes, introduction, starting with introductory GIS, which is what I teach. A lot of these students, are going out and working, of course, local government, but also other industries. So it is definitely geared towards, preparing students for real world GIS applications. So we focus a lot on that and preparing them for either a new career or a promotion. The other program that I oversee is the Master of Science in GIS Administration. So this is a program that involves an MBA foundation core as well as a GIS core. Again, really preparing students, at that higher level for the workforce. Sure, we have some students who may publish their work, but it's a capstone-based program where, we require students to find a client and create a solution for them. And Derek really works with those students and mentors those students, so he can talk more about that. In terms of courses, over the last few years, something that we've done, of course, is incorporating more ArcGIS Online and web-based type mapping solutions and all the various products that Esri offers. Using that, previously we were certainly using ArcGIS Pro and desktop and focusing a lot on that, but realize, of course, use of dashboards and, of course, storing up presentations and all the things just throughout all of the courses. And something else I should probably point out is that these are cohort based. So a lot of the same groups of students are working through the program. There's a prescribed course sequence that they follow, which makes it really nice for us teaching and being able to support these students throughout the entire program because we can, update classes kind of systematically and know, like, yes, they're coming in with this previous course knowledge and experience. So that's one thing that I would say we've kind of just, generally have done. But something that we're in current discussion with now is regarding our master's program, that MBA foundation core. There's 15 hours currently, and it is an MBA foundation. So if somebody wanted to go off and get an MBA, they would have the foundation required to do that. However, we've gotten some students in our program recently, really at certificate and master's level, also interested in particular with data science, and some other classes that are being offered throughout the university that, are GIS and public health, GIS, maybe even maybe with crime analysis, that kind of thing, other departments. So what we're looking to do is to kind of free up some of the MBA core to be able to allow students to maybe take a couple of data science classes. So I've, talked to the program director there. We also reached out to Pete Croswell recently to get some input from him on maybe what the core MBA foundation courses would be. Also reached out to Adam Carnow with Esri, and they've both given us some great input. And I would just say that discussion is ongoing. So that's just something that we're kind of looking at changing at the program level. And I should probably stop here and move on to the next person, let Derek have his chance.
Thanks, Amber. My name is Derek Morgan, and I work with Amber very closely on what you just described, our master's degree in GIS, and we have a graduate certificate as well, which ends up being a really nice way for students to not commit to a whole master's degree, but then many of them do decide to continue on to the master's degree. And so I have a PhD in geography, and like Carmi, I actually do have some years in industry, not as many. I worked for about 17 years in industry as a computer programmer, and then eventually became a GIS programmer, and then came into academia in 2015 when I came to UWF to help get this master's degree going. And the courses I teach are in, a few of the core classes in that degree program, which include the GIS management course, which I use Peter Croswell's book, which I found that to be a very solid textbook for that particular course. And maybe one of the only GIS management textbooks out there. I know there's a couple others, but that one's very comprehensive. And I've gotten to meet Peter at EURESA, or I should say GPN events over the years. So that's been nice to see him presenting those workshops and to be able to think about how do I bring this into the classroom. So that, as it's like a master's degree in GIS administration, we have a management focus. But I also bring in a lot of the sort of my own particular background in like scripting and IT stuff. So I teach a GIS programming class. I know Robbyn mentioned that as well. And that's evolved over time. Kind of has to, but like I'll say the best part of that course, the best direction that course has gone, and I would say ArcGIS in general, has been in integrating notebooks into ArcGIS Pro. That for me was like a game changer in terms of teaching intro GIS programming, because you didn't have to get students out of ArcGIS desktop into like some IDE straight away and be dealing with the whole complexity of that. But we do get them into an IDE, but I keep it pretty low level. I keep it just in IDLE, which is like the IDE that comes with Python, because we don't go too far into it. It's an intro programming class. It just wrapped up like yesterday, and that's always a fun class to teach in the summer. Feels like, Google Summer of Code in like 6 weeks or something. And another class I teach that I particularly like teaching is it's called Advanced Topics, but it's really if I was to say the functional name is WebGIS programming. And that's evolved definitely over time. I started out just straight JavaScript, leaflet, they didn't even crack ArcGIS the whole time. And then it's evolved over time. And now it's definitely become more of like what Amber was talking about, where we're trying to like integrate it into what kind of workflows they might see in the workplace. And I haven't received a whole lot of feedback since these changes, because I just made them last year, but I've now have them working. I still do the leaflet thing in the beginning and, kind of the standalone JavaScript. Hey, this is JavaScript world. So it's a whole nother world, kind of like Python, but it's another scripting language, but you can do it because you did Python. And then I bring them into GIS slowly I decided through GEE, which is Google Earth Engine, because Google Earth Engine has like a nice interface with JavaScript. And then we go into ArcGIS Online with the JavaScript API. But I won't go into too much detail, but that's what I'm working on what I've worked on recently. That was like last year. Does that cover it, Amber?
Yeah, it sounds good.
All right, great. So these are our panelists. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. I know quite a few of you touched on new geospatial classes that you are developing. Just wanted to pause here briefly. Is anybody developing a new class that they haven't already mentioned that they'd like to speak to briefly?
Yeah, I'm developing a course that I'm going to be teaching this fall called WebGIS Studio at the University of South Carolina. I mean, academics know that the departments don't always get to choose who or how many professors they hire. So we actually have like WebGIS stuff on the books, but they're all 500 level classes, and we don't have any professors who are qualified to teach any WebGIS here. And the college is not hiring them. And so I don't have a PhD, so I can't teach over 500 levels. So I have created this course for undergraduates so that at least our undergraduates can get exposure into WebGIS before they graduate. And hopefully we'll get a professor eventually.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, I don't think I saw anybody else for new courses. So generally, as you're in the classroom, what geospatial technologies and trends do you see your students really gravitate to or really express interest in? We'll open this up for anybody that would like to speak to this.
I'll hop in here real quick, and I will say that my experience is that I typically have a group of students who are really excited about anything that has to do with plants and animals and the things outside. And then I have a whole other group that are not engaged until we start talking about people and where people are and how they're engaging in their built environment. So I typically have that dichotomy. I don't find anything like any topic in particular that they all latch onto, but in our advanced class, we teach it as it used to be a service learning, which service learning was an older model here at Miami. I teach it now as a client-based class. So the students all are working for either one client altogether that's outside the university or kind of a couple of them, and I split them into teams. And I mean, it's a giant group project, and we all have the same feelings about group projects, right? They're necessary. It's how life is, but we all hate the group project. So the students can be quite testy and hateful throughout the semester a little bit. But I will say that at the end of the semester, the one thing that they all say on their evaluations and when they go out into the workforce, the thing that they reflect back on is that practical application. Like I know many of the panelists have already mentioned what we're focusing on in the classroom is what are those real ways that we apply this out in the world? And they have to solve their own problems. They're being tossed data that's not clean. They're being asked to solve problems that there might not be a clear pathway. They have to kind of bounce around and test it out. So while they don't necessarily gravitate to that because we force them to do it, I will say that it's one of the things that at the end of the day, they seem to find the most valuable as they do transition out into the workforce.
Yep.
Very briefly, following up on Robbyn, comment on the workforce. In my graduate courses, especially for the professional graduate students who have their main job, day job, where they're working in county offices or some kind of GIS, or maybe just in general data science, not only spatial data science, they're looking for how to communicate or visualize output from geospatial analysis using a technology to communicate with the community members. So they always want to see, so what? So what, I have a beautifully looking hotspot map, or some a big like remote sensing product that you have analyzed. So what does it mean to the people? Because they want to go into the workforce and work for citizens in general, so community members, how they can communicate to technology, that I found to be one of those comments. And therefore story maps, dashboards, and I know there is a whole lot of love and hate relationship with the proliferation of dashboards, but any kind of technology that will be easily accessible, not behind too many license and pays wall and whatnot, how the output can be communicated to general people. And I think that is helpful to our field because it will bring them a pipeline of bodies, the students, and circle them out. Like it will keep our discipline also active. I know it wasn't brief, but that was my spiel here.
All right, Carmi?
Yeah, you touch on something very interesting. And you're going to laugh, some of you will laugh anyway. For several years, I ignored story maps, thinking that it was, kind of juvenile almost. Maybe that was my own snobbish interpretation, unfounded, but until I regularly meet with people in the community. A lot of those people are people that I know from 20 years ago from my ESRI experience, but you can tell it's old. I'm not saying Esri. But they are people in local government. Many people have told me that they use story maps all the time to present data to non-technical audiences, and it shocked me. So I have integrated story maps into my intro class. I don't spend a lot of time on it, but we do one. And anyway, just in terms of what Deb's just said about communicating to others, especially to a non-technical audience, story maps are something that I've decided to include. So
Yeah, I would echo that. It's story maps. When I first heard it, I was like, I can do advanced spatial statistics. Like, what is this? It's a toy, right? And then I got out into the real world and started working, and I realized that if I go to a bunch of biologists and start talking about space-time pattern analysis, they don't want anything to do with it. But then I show them story maps, and now all of a sudden, oh, they want a dashboard. Oh, they want to do more. So it's definitely your foot in the door.
Yeah, I just wanted to say things that I see students interested in are they're seeing it on job descriptions along with GIS. So I would say that's something students are asking for, and we are looking into incorporate where possible. Another thing I've noticed just over the last few years is, especially for our certificate level, getting more students in utilities industry, especially. Of course, there's others, but that one just seems to be kind of high on the list. That's it.
All right. So, and that thank you all for your insight on that. That seemed to be a really similar question probably to what topics and problems, and Robbyn pointed out, well, there are the environmental ones, the human environmental ones, and then the human ones type piece. But do any of you have a really quick story about something really interesting or it's insightful or creative that you've had students try to use GIS to understand or answer? Go
Well,
ahead, Carmi.
oh, yeah, go ahead.
okay, I don't want to monopolize here. I'll try to make it brief. My first exercise that we do in my intro course is mapping Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks across the city of Chicago, and then correlating that with census data in terms of race, ethnicity, and needless to say, income. And they're fascinated by that, and they all buy coffee all the time. Some spend it at Dunkin' and some spend it at Starbucks and some at McDonald's, but they see this spatial relationship between where Starbucks are located and where Dunkin' Donuts are located. But it's not only there are two things going on here. It's not only relative to wealth, but it's also a different business model. Starbucks are corporately owned, so they can cluster closer together without the idea of cannibalizing, another franchisee's outlet. Dunkin' Donuts are, for the most part, franchises, so their spatial distribution is different. The point here is that they're not just seeing, okay, we know that there are more Starbucks located in higher wealth areas, but what we're seeing is not just that, but if we look more closely, we're seeing a different business model and the spatial outcome of two different business models, corporately owned versus franchise.
That's really cool. Mine is not necessarily driven by the students nor by myself, but for my class, since it's that project based, I had someone that I'd met at an Ohio GIS conference connect me up with a person in their community who was wanting to map out some of her family movements. So, and it was actually, we got connected up in part of a documentary, but the crux was that it's mapping a group of people called the Randolph Freed people from from them being enslaved in Virginia to their manumissions when they were freed, and they had money that bought them property in Mercer County, which is northern Ohio, kind of at the end of where the canals were at the time in the 1800s. Unfortunately, they were not allowed to settle there because of the backlash of the newly settled white German settlers who essentially chased them away from there. And then the person who was in charge of their property and their money ended up divvying out money, and they kind of all bought stuff kind of far flung in different areas in the state of Ohio. But they were the idea here is where were those original properties that were purchased for them? So the fun thing here is that the students got to see how GIS can give you an outcome, but what you have to go back to is the literal handwritten deeds from the 1800s. So while they were in a technology class, this was another thing of hateful students, but they had to learn how to read cursive because they did not know how to read cursive, and they had to figure out how to read a deed and section it out thankfully it was in the part of Ohio that's part of what we now know as the Public Land Survey System. So it was, they understood how to get to the recorder sections, but we were able to, by going through all those deeds, find almost all of the 3,200 acres of property that was originally purchased for those families. And that now is going back to the original group, and they're now working with the State House on basically generational wealth and whether or not the state of Ohio owns any of that land and could do anything for the families. But that was an example of the students who really got on board with that. Because they saw a historical application. And I think they did not quite understand before that GIS does a really great job of telling us what's here now and understanding our current environment, but it was them being able to use it to understand historical information and contextual information as well. So that was something we didn't come up with, but we were asked to do, and the students really enjoyed it.
All right, I always like hearing those stories, and I think that really gets us into probably two of our big questions for today. And so, for students that have gone through these classes or had those really insightful or impactful experiences in the classroom or research, when they leave and they start working in the industry, what do you hear from them about what skills, expertise, or experiences they found most useful, that were most helpful to them when they started working or continued working in the geospatial workforce?
Well, I'll start off here, if that's okay, Matt. What I hear from the alumni is the trio of geography and related fields, the scale, time, and the scale. It's very important, and related to that, knowing what is special about your spatial data. I think most of us have used that sentence in their lecture. To understanding the concept of not the concept, what's different about the spatial data, what it can do, what it cannot do, and related to that, the scale, how things are hierarchy embedded into the scale, how does aggregation works, which way you can go, which way you cannot go because of the ecological fallacy and all kinds of wrong interpretations. You cannot start from an aggregate data of a coarser scale. So all this is linked to our fundamental and the core, and that's why I touched that into my introduction here, that's so important. And those are the folks who will stand out, in my opinion, in this crowded, dynamic and evolving every time the field, if you have that fundamentals and the core principles solid. Projection is one of them. If you don't know what that means, all your spatial analysis, distance, accessibility studies is not correct. That goes, although I'm not trained in real like the cartography, but without cartography, you cannot have a good map, even though you have fancy technology to create the map, but you still need to know the cartographic elements to communicate your advanced analysis to common people. So I think those fundamentals are very important, and those stay with our students who go into the workforce and in their careers.
Right. Thanks, Debs. Amber or Derek, what feedback do you get from folks that go through the West Florida program?
So for our certificate program, I would say students tend to highlight the GIS programming class, as well as our applied courses that have helped them. Of course, with it being such a comprehensive program, I'm not too surprised that they, mention the more applied classes. Another thing that I would say for those students, the GIS internship. I help place students in internships, and I also teach the class. It's more of a professional development type course, helping them get ready for, beyond the certificate program. Just that opportunity to, apply what they've learned in class in a real world setting is so huge. It makes all the difference. And I would probably say something similar to, I don't get to speak with as many of our master's program students as Derek does, so I'll let him kind of speak to that. But I do hear from them in terms of that the required capstone, that 2 full semesters of, like I said, working with a client and not just coming up with an idea and then running with it, but actually getting input from that client on what they need and what they want in the whole process for their project. And then maybe as a final thing that I would say is that our students are uniquely prepared for remote work or hybrid work or any of that combination with them being online and accessing our remote desktop service with all of the GIS software and resources that they need. Working remotely, they do it in every single class, and communication, written, forums, meeting like this in Zoom. They're all very well prepared for that through all the practice they've had throughout our program and getting feedback and guidance from us on what is the appropriate way to communicate if they ever kind of fall outside of the parameters that we are looking for. Derek, I'll let you go now.
Yeah, I wish I knew more, like exactly how the students used what they learn in our courses, to be honest. It's kind of very rarely that I'll receive an email or feedback to say, hey, that thing I learned in your course really served me well in my job. But there are some of those, but it's so few, I can't recall like specific ones right now. Like the one I'm thinking of was like 10 years ago, you know. But there's been some of that, but the capstone is like Amber said, it's an applied project, and I'd say about half of them choose to do it in their working organization. We make a big push about don't do it on what you work on day to 9 to 5, you know, do a side project kind of thing. But then the other half will choose something like outside of that or their own interest, but it always has to be with a real world client. I have seen a number of students complete our master's degree and then shortly afterward get a promotion, either by them telling me or just me being connected with them in LinkedIn and seeing them move into like a management position or something like that. That has happened fairly often. You know, it's enough that it's encouraging. It's not like, you know, guarantee or anything like that, but it's neat when you see it happen. Like somebody could complete a master's degree in GIS for the because they almost all of them work in GIS already, like usually like an analyst, technician, or somewhere further along, somewhere in allied fields. But the ones who go to it because they want to move up in their GIS career seem to be able to use it for that. And I think, you know, Peter Croswell's book on management is helpful because he talks a lot about things like scope creep, that's something that's not taught in academia very much, but it exists very much in the real world. And I wouldn't be surprised if covering that and then having students develop a scope of a project in multiple cases throughout their master's degree. And then with their capstone, they face a very real reality that if they don't manage the scope of their project, they're not going to finish their capstone. And that happens sometimes, you know, and I have to give them an incomplete or an extension, and, you know, because they didn't manage the scope. And so I don't know, it'd be nice if there was more feedback, like maybe we should survey them a year or two out, you know, but I'm just going off what I think.
All right, and I do agree with your point that it's really rewarding when we see what happens to our past students, you know, when they move up and they get promotions, or they move from working the Esri tech support help desk to managing programs at Esri, and all those are all those different things. So we are running short on time, as I was afraid that we were going to do, but I was optimistic. But one of the other big areas where I think this conversation is helpful is that you're seeing in the classroom tomorrow's employees. And we know that over time, and in the 25 years I've been part of academia and teaching, that patterns and expectations and levels of preparations of students change. And we wind up adapting or continually change maybe some of our tools or techniques or ways of doing things to help be effective educators and help continue to educate and prepare students. So what are your thoughts on what are some things or observations that maybe hiring managers may need to be aware of or may need to be thinking about based on what you're seeing in students today that maybe you weren't seeing 5 years ago or 10 years ago and those students that you were working with then? Go ahead, Derek.
Well, I hate to open this can of worms, but I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about this briefly. AI is changing everything, right? And I keep being confronted with this in my classes. And you know, how are we gonna adapt to that? And, you know, I don't know, my initial thoughts and my experiences being that we're gonna need to embrace it, not try to stop it from being used, you know? But if that's too much of a can of worms, Sorry I went there if you were looking for something else. But people who are going to work today are going to be using AI, you know?
Yeah, I often say if I wasn't using AI, I wouldn't be qualified to do my job anymore. And I really feel strongly about that. You know, in academia, there's this debate over, you know, what role is it going to play within academia? Outside of academia, they've already passed that conversation long ago. So I really worry that academia is being left in the dust because technology is advancing so quickly. I mean, I have, you know, it's not uncommon to look at a professor's syllabi and be like, yeah, this is way outdated, you know. So I think that there's a couple things happening. I think that we're seeing technology advance and we're seeing academics fall behind. And I think that students don't struggle enough as I think they maybe used to. I find that students give up easily, want help faster. You know, they want those immediate results. And if they hit, you know, a bump in the road, they're just going to quit or give up. So that's kind of one of the challenges, that how do we get students and young professionals kind of struggle more.
Robbyn?
Yeah, so one thing I see, and just to warn anybody out there, is that, and I have teenagers and young adults and college students myself. They hate email. We force them to use it, but I want to just say I'm sorry if they don't respond to your emails, but you will struggle to get them to communicate via email because it's just not the way that they really want to communicate. But because of that, we also have communication learning objectives in our classes that they have to learn how to communicate professionally on an email platform, because it will still exist for a little while. So that's one of the big struggles we have. And I will say that when it comes to AI, I think in our field, the answer to AI is a lot easier than the answer to AI in higher ed in general. Higher ed in general, where your goal is to teach people to think. I'm glad really that I'm not in a field that really has to struggle with that, because that's going to be an existential thing to have to deal with. So I think in our field, we're blessed in that we have this kind of beautiful mix of being able to show them how something is done, then ask them to ask AI to do it and see what the answer is from AI. And if then they can start to see how and where the AI might be wrong, or might be opening up new doors for them. In the programming class, I find that the most helpful. Once they get a little bit of Python under themselves, and I toss them something, and I'll even tell them that I ask AI real quick, how do I do this? And then I have the ability to look at what's being spit out to be the human. And also with the AI, I think we're gonna quickly hit a point where we've fed it so much junk that it doesn't know what's junk and what's not junk. So that ability to critically think through and have the basic knowledge beforehand, before you're trying to sift through the AI answer, is going to be important. But it's the Wild West, so we're all just kind of running through that one. And the last thing I'll say is that I think students these days are much better about telling those around them what their needs are, and they have been raised in an environment to ask for help for those needs, which, Kevin, I think leads to some of that. I have noticed, I've been doing this now for 20 years. I've noticed an element of that kind of giving up because they are used to getting a lot of help. But I think the other side of that coin is this kind of new person who they are maybe more aware of where their faults are, and they do have a lot of them have the skills to ask for help for those particular things that might be a little incongruous with the workforce or with the traditional classroom, which I think they're the first generation really to have those resources and to have a language around that And I think maybe it does make it a little uncomfortable for those of us of older generations when they come into the workforce with those, with that language and with those expectations. But I think I'm hoping that over time we learn to see that it's kind of a benefit, that you get to see a bit of the more whole person and understand what their strengths and weaknesses are from the beginning.
All right, thanks, Robbyn. Carmi?
Yeah, Robbyn, I applaud you for your optimistic and creative approach to this. I have to say, I mean, I've been doing computer graphics since 1979, so no one can really call me a Luddite, but I don't assign any papers. I give tests in class because they always got A's when I let them do it online. And I also, for years, have not let them use technology in the classroom except for the GIS workstation. And why other instructors don't do that is beyond me. But uh, going back to whoever said, I think it was Kevin who said about struggle. Well, what what I'm doing is making them struggle. And so I don't know. Sometimes they have to deal with rules that are not to their liking, and they'll certainly have to deal with that in the real world. And I guess I sort of detoured us away from AI, but not not letting them use it much in class is one way of challenging them in a way they aren't used to, I guess. But sorry, that was a little discombobulated, but
That's all right. It'll be interesting to see what some of the AI summaries come back with as the key point of that statement. But there is some talk going on in chat that I truly believe that the sign of a great webinar is you have your next webinar idea coming together by the time the webinar wraps. And so I think definitely with one of the themes today and what we've talked about with how AI is changing what we do as practitioners, but it changes what we do as students, and that there are a lot of terms and techniques that even if you look at the Esri slide deck, it winds up not necessarily being the most clear and concise. That we might get some more of us together for another conversation. Maybe exploring, as Deb's put it, the overlapping but really not always distinct areas of geo AI, machine learning, text learning, spatial location, etc. So that's a great observation. Thanks for contributing that. We are up at the end of our hour, and so I think we've kept up with most of the questions that have come in through Q&A and chat. There were some things come in through the Q&A about geodesign, which I think really highlighted there's a lot that geospatial does, but sometimes some things in geospatial pop up in certain areas more than others. And so we see more of the programming and the data science area. We do see more of the geodesign if it's more in a planning program or architecture program type area and emphasis. So I think that wraps some of that up. But did want to thank everybody for tuning in today to hear the conversation, and special thanks to all our panelists, Carmi, Kevin, Robbyn, Debs, Amber, and Derek. What we really wanted to try to do with this experiment was try to get as many different voices as possible, sharing some thoughts on some of these big questions that we see in higher ed and impacting the industry. So as we distill this and plan for future webinars or future discussions that may build on some of the themes that we touched on today, please visit thegpn.org or tune in to the GPN on your social media platform of choice to catch up and stay in touch with what we'll be talking about next on our series. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks, Matt. Glad to be here. Have a good one.
Take
Goodbye,
care.
all.